Back in 2004, I needed a pickup at Christmas time for whatever reason, and this story provided it. I think it's one of the most beautiful Christmas stories I ever read or heard. It was written by an editorial writer in the New York Daily News named Karen Zautyk. I hope you play this video for your children. It was cold in the stable that night, and the animals were huddled together for warmth. The cows and the oxen and the donkey, and one little lamb. A sad, scrawny little lamb, both lame and frail, too frail to be out with the flock in the fields. The shepherds had carried it into the stable where it would be safe from the wind and the wolves, because the wind and the wolves came down from the hills with a fierceness in the wintertime. The lamb had food and shelter, but that wasn't enough. It was lonely. Separated from its mother, it felt unloved. The other animals tried to be kind, but they didn't have any time. During the day they were busy working. The cows had milk to make, the oxen had earth to plow, and the donkeys had carts to pull. At night they were all very tired, and they'd feed upon the fodder and then go right to bed. None would talk and none would play, and they surely wouldn't sing a lullaby to a lamb that needed comfort. Every night the lamb would cry and be told to hush, for its bleats disturbed their sleep. Thus that night the lamb cried without making a sound, as it had learned to do. And I looked at the strangers who were sharing the stable, at this man who held the woman's hand and spoke to her so softly, and especially at the woman who spoke not at all. Huddled together, the animals slept, and eventually the lamb slept too, and the night was silent. But then, in the darkest hour, there was no more darkness and no more silence. There was the cry of a baby, and the stable shone with the brightest of lights, and there were voices ringing in the air. The animals, shaken from their dreams, were frightened. They stamped their hooves and tossed their heads and made their frightened animal sounds. But the light was so lovely and the voices so beautiful, it wasn't long before they quieted and began to lose their fear. And when the light had dimmed to a glow, and the voices were only an echo, there in the manger they saw it, the baby, and their eyes went wide with wonder. The animals murmured, but would not approach until the woman beckoned. Then one by one the beasts came forward, all that is, except the lamb, which was only a baby itself and still terribly afraid. Forgotten by the others, it trembled in a corner and tried to hide beneath the hay. But the baby in the manger was trembling too. The cold of the night had returned and the baby had started to shiver. When the animals saw this, they huddled closer together around the crib. The man took off his cloak and made a blanket out of it. The cloak was thin and threadbare and provided little warmth. The woman held the baby to her breast, but he shivered still, and she began to weep. And the lamb, which knew what weeping meant, lifted itself from the hay. Though it was still afraid, it left its hiding place. It made its way among the legs of the bigger beasts until it stood beside the woman, and it laid its head against her knee. And the softest of hands reached down and stroked its wool. And the gentlest of hands picked it up and tucked it into the manger straw, and tucked the baby in beside it, and covered them both with the cloak. The baby snuggled near and smiled and closed his eyes, and the lamb was very glad it had learned to cry without making a sound, because it was crying now and didn't want to wake the baby. But the lamb wasn't crying because it was sad. It was crying because at last it didn't feel alone, or afraid, or unloved. Then the lamb closed its eyes too, and the woman sang a lullaby. Karen Zautyk, a member of the Daily News editorial board, wrote this for her father John, who was never too busy or too tired to tell his child a bedtime story. Peace on earth from the Predator.